Hello and welcome to Digital Signage Explored. My name is Tim from Signagelive. Thank you very much for joining us today. Joining me today is Giles Corbett from CloudShelf, founder. Giles, thank you so much for jumping on with me.
Tim, it's a real pleasure to be here and fantastic to be back on a show with you. I
Perfect.
understand this is your first fully live show.
This
This is going
is
to be exciting.
this is fully live, and there's a lot. I mean, this might seem quite organized, but behind the scenes, there's a lot of new technical things that we're testing. So if things do go wrong or something happens, then apologies. But we are just fleshing out some of the bugs. To be honest with you, so far it seems so good. Joe, you got a thumbs up there? Are we all good audio wise? Joe's just listening through.
I,
It's a
I,
slight
I
delay.
think Elon Musk and Donald Trump would love for things to go as smoothly as this.
Well, listen, we're early in, but everything's going well. Let's just touch wood and hope it keeps going that way. So, Giles, appreciate you coming on. You with CloudShelf, obviously. Could you give us a bit of a brief elevator pitch on what CloudShelf is?
Yeah, sure. So CloudShelf is a software as a solution service that runs on devices such as kiosks and other interactive screens in brick and mortar stores.
Hmm.
In a nutshell, we connect our platform to a retailer's product data, their price books, their inventory to create digital catalogs that can be deployed onto touch and display screens throughout their real estate. Now,
Okay,
all of those connections may sound a bit complicated, but Tim, I know you've actually tried
I have.
CloudShelf.
Yeah.
And what you've seen is that actually our magic is that we managed to connect all of that up in a matter of minutes.
You're right. I have tested it out, and it is a phenomenal piece of technology, especially for retail stores that are feeling a pinch at the moment. Maybe a little bit from where they're getting their finances from, how they're boosting their numbers, how they're generating more revenue with the same or less footprint that they're utilizing. And there's a huge amount of value, which is why I was really excited to have you on the show, because I think the intention and the aim for Digital Signage Explored is to explore those elements that people may not be familiar with, or they are in a certain vertical or a sector, such as retail, and saying, I've heard of digital signage, or I haven't jumped into that yet. What else, aside from just a screen on the wall, can this do for us? And I think it's a really good opportunity to delve into that a little bit. So I guess with that in mind, my first question to you is just around the kind of customers you have and what kind of questions they're asking you about. Why are they coming to your door in the first place saying, we have this problem? What is that
Yep.
problem?
So we have a very, very wide range of customers, and I'll touch on some of them or some examples of them, but they all approach us with a similar problem.
Mm.
The core is that they have products to sell that for some reason you can't see in the store. And the pain point for them is what we call walkout. So
Hmm.
basically, I go into my local store with money to spend in my pocket. I want to go and get a table or a pair of jeans or a bike or something
Yeah,
that's on sale in that store. And I can't find exactly what I want. And I leave the store disappointed without having spent money.
sure.
That's what all of our customers in some shape or form are trying to avoid. So that's what they have in common.
That
But
makes
the
sense.
situations are each time super different. So for instance, we have, I mean, in terms of the range, we have a chain of high-end butchers in Dubai. We have pet accessories in North America, sports gear in Latin America, high street fashion in Spain. So they're all very different products, but they all share that common thing of, for some reason or another, the customer can't see exactly what it is they want. And if they can't find a way of showing it to them, they're going to lose the sale. And what we found, you know what, I'll just stop there actually.
No, I mean that's really interesting. In fact, I was gonna push a little bit harder on the butchers after
Not
all.
pushing it hard. Let's
Yeah,
stop it
I feel like all of those
let
were
you push. No, push away.
all of those were quite. I could see there's a lot of similarities, and then you pulled out a butcher in Dubai that wanted to have this. So what? I guess it's the same query is that people are walking out just saying, "No, we didn't find the product that we wanted," but actually they can create it, or they can go and there's just more available that isn't on the shelf. Is this the same, but just from a butcher's perspective?
It is. I mean, they have a whole range of very special cuts and preparations that they'll do,
Mm.
and these are all at a big premium to just the normal stuff, and therefore to be able to go and promote those and sell them for special events or whatever,
Mm.
that makes apparently a very big difference to their business.
So I'm curious because obviously first got introduced maybe a couple of years ago now when we started demonstrating or testing out whether CloudShelf would work with Signagelive, and that's where we first met. But I'm curious as to where this started as a requirement, like when you started looking at saying there's a gap in the market or there's something that's missing. What was the first inception point that made you think about that?
Well, interestingly, the very, very beginning was the realization, it was a bet that we took,
Mm.
that retail was going to be with more stores for the long term. You got to remember, running up to the pandemic, there was a view that actually everything was going to just move online.
Right.
And then during lockdowns, we had to move all of our lives online. And I think most of us decided we didn't really like it all that much.
Mm.
And so once lockdowns came to an end, I think many people, retailers included, recognized that their physical estate had real value. And we saw big retailers, incredibly successful online retailers such as Next, had cut all investment in its brick and mortar stores, saying actually, now we need to go and reinvest in this.
Mm.
And we saw companies like Shopify that had come to life entirely on the basis of an online world, advising all of its smaller retailers, if you want to go and build your brand, if you want to go and acquire new customers, you should be looking at pop-ups, you should be looking at stores, because these will actually be essential for your brand building exercise. And so, we bet that stores would be part of the future, but we also bet that they would change in the sense that they would need to be closer to shoppers. Why? Because we did have the convenience of online. And therefore, if you want to go and compete with the online offering as a brick and mortar retailer, and you want to take advantage of what you have, then you do need to make sure that you remain convenient. And part of that is being close to where people live. And then the thinking carried on, because if retailers were going to be close to where people lived, it meant that there would be more of these outlets. And if there were going to be more of them, they'd have to be smaller.
Mm-hmm.
If they were going to be smaller, then they were going to have bigger issues displaying all of their range, stock, etc. And therefore, they had a bigger risk of walkouts or a bigger need for a digital solution. And all of that thinking was basically what led to the beginning of CloudShelf.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
And when we started, I know you'll remember that when we first met, Tim, we were working with a lot of small independent retailers, and they were fantastic at helping us really refine our solution and the product and what was needed. And in fact, they did such a good job of helping us do that, that now the solution is being adopted, of course, by small independent retailers, scale-ups, but also by some absolutely massive global retail brands. So, that's really how that came about. But recently, we've been working with a sports gear retailer on a concept that really brings a whole of the thing together. They often have fairly big format stores, 2,500 square meters.
Yeah, massive.
And they wanted to experiment with much smaller, more local stores. So basically the story that I was telling you about, and they realized that they needed digital to go and support that. And when we look at what they're doing, for us, it's absolutely fascinating because they're taking advantage of all of their physical infrastructure, and they're using and now merging in all of the digital to create a pretty unique and amazing experience.
Well, I think that's a really good approach into something that we talked about, because we often have a bit of a call before this just to kind of get familiar with what we're going to talk about, just high level key points and things. But you'd mentioned to me something called a hub and spoke approach, which I thought was really fascinating, because I'm in the digital signage world. I'm not really in the retail world per se, but it made a huge amount of sense once you mentioned it, because I've started to see these larger stores have a lot more spin-off, kind of smaller footprint spaces that are just getting a little bit closer to home, or they're not holding as much stock, but they're just a presence, A, from a branding visibility perspective, but B, because, convenience, as you say, just being able to get there rather than go right into the middle of a big city center just because you want to go pick up a few bits. And this, you mentioned, is kind of where a lot of these businesses are taking traction up with using CloudShelf, or just being able to display far more product than what is just in store at that time, right? And then the delivery can kind of all come from that hub and then be delivered out to the spokes as and when needed. Is that kind of an accurate representation of that?
That is perfectly well summarized. And the benefits for a retailer doing this are absolutely enormous.
Hmm.
They achieve this point that we talked about at the beginning of actually getting closer to their customers. They are able to delight customers who now feel that they can go and shop in their store without needing to take a car and drive out of town or wherever.
Mm-hmm.
The customers are even more delighted when they discover that any of their, in their case, absolutely enormous range can be delivered back in store within 2 hours of the customer.
Oh, wow. Really that fast?
So because you've got the hub and spoke, so actually the distance between the hub and the spoke is an hour and a half.
Mm-hmm.
So they're able to go and manage frequent shipments that go and get the products to the customers in a really, really timely manner.
That is interesting because I wasn't aware of that. It was actually going to be one of my questions because I think everyone's had that experience when you go into a store and you're looking for something very specific, or at least within a range that's very specific that you want to buy. And then you're disappointed it's not there, and you think, I guess I'll probably just order that online. And then you've got a day or two shipping, whatever that ends up being. And if it's more bespoke products, like the things that you're talking about, sometimes they aren't available for immediate delivery on certain services. So having that turnaround has to be quick for it to be valuable. And I was thinking quick might be a day or two, but an hour or two is incredibly fast. And that can be something where you go, I'll come back in an hour and a half, or I'm only down the road so I can come and pick it up. Then suddenly that adds way more value to that hub and spoke process that you're mentioning.
It does. And compared with the online only experience, as a customer, I'm getting all of the benefit of the knowledge of the staff. And the staff in these stores are super knowledgeable.
Mm-hmm.
So, as you go in and I know you're looking for a bike or hiking shoes or whatever it may be, they're able to really advise and help guide you through the purchase.
Mm-hmm.
And what we go and see is through the use of these CloudShelf displays, where in each of the departments of the store, they go and have a different display displaying products of that range.
Yeah.
We still see that lots of customers will engage with the screens, but when customers are actually purchasing, in most of the cases, there is a sales assistant who's come along and said, how can I help you? And exactly as the sales assistant would normally go and help you, go and sort of look between the physical pair of shoes, they're helping you on a sort of reasonably large screen so that you can go and see all the products, and they're guiding you and recommending, etc. And the feedback we're getting is phenomenal. I think one of the questions was, how will non-digital customers react to this? And it turns out that non-digital customers are some of the biggest fans of the solution, because
really?
they don't really know their way around internet. They don't really know how to go and pay on it, etc. They're not too sure. They turn up in the store and the person advises them, shows them on screen. The screen is so easy to use. They just tap their credit card and pay and go, and it's all done.
Yeah. And then also, I mean, if you're in those situations, you also have an assistant there that's very familiar with the product, and just be like, no, let me just help you go through this. And it's a couple of steps. And I was thinking about this product actually the other day, and I think one of the things that they're probably also looking at doing, and this is more conjecture because, I've been not in retail directly, but there must be a huge volume of footfall now that goes into browse or shop and then make their decision later online. And the risk of them making that decision out of store is that it might not end up being from that store. Whereas if you have that option to purchase there and then, even if you don't have the product there, you're securing that purchase there and then, rather in the hopes that they come back and make a decision later or whatever that might be. So it's just trying to reduce down some of that loss that you might have from browsers.
There was a pretty important study done a few years ago on what actually happens when somebody enters a store wanting to buy something and walks out without getting it. And you know how you've heard loads of time somebody in the store say, oh, but you can find it on the website.
Right.
On the website, great, I'll check it when I get home. Well, actually, you'll only buy it from them in under 10% of cases.
Right.
In around a third of cases, you'll end up buying it online elsewhere. In a bit under a third of cases, you'll find another store that has it, and you're able to go and get it there. And in roughly a third of cases, you'll simply drop the purchase altogether. So this ability to actually close the transaction while you're in the store wanting to buy it is super important. But the crazy thing is, not only does this actually generate a lot of revenue and additional sales to the retailers, and I'll give you some numbers about that in
Yeah,
a
please.
few minutes, but but what it also does is it massively boosts shopper satisfaction.
Hmm.
And this is one of the things that we knew. I mean, you asked me, where did CloudShelf come from? It came from
Yeah.
the fact I used to do a lot of research in retail and on site. And the biggest driver of shopper dissatisfaction is if they've left the store without buying something. So you've got this kind of double whammy if somebody walks out. You haven't got their money and they actually have a pretty negative perception of the store.
Yeah, for sure.
Whereas if you can get them the product, you've got the money and you've made them happy. So there are all kinds of shopper benefits in having this kind of digital experience that guarantees that if I can't see exactly the bike I'm looking for, or the jeans or the table or whatever it is that I've gone in for the store for, that the sales assistant can go and help me find exactly the right one on the screen, can reassure me, and I can go and close that transaction and get it. So the customers are actually happier with this.
Well, I wanted to touch on actually because you mentioned something earlier on in this is the experience that people are having,
Yeah.
and there's a good episode that I did. I can't remember which episode it was now, but with Matt Neutra from Brightsign, because he does a lot of this kind of experiential work with the Brightsign devices and pulling the most out of them in terms of lighting and effects and things like that, and it all. That plus another one that I did with a reseller called TPP Retail, it all kind of infuses to say that retail spaces no longer can just be a shoebox full of things that you need. There has to be some value, some intrinsic experience that you have going there. And it might be that you're out and about and you just want to go and have a look in the shops, but it has to add a value from a brand perspective. It has to give you that kind of brand alignment, I guess is the best way of putting it. I go and shop here because I'm this kind of person, or this is something that I believe in, or there's something a little bit more tangible to it than. And not many people now just go and walk into a Gap store because they really desperately need a pair of jeans. They can do that somewhere else. It's just that they are aligned with that brand. So being able to bring that kind of emotional roller coaster through, and then facilitating any sale there, as you say, is turning these. There was a sentence you used when we first started testing. I've got it written down here on a note that I can barely read, which is revenue for square footage, which I thought was really interesting. Is this kind of you're getting down to millimeter measurement of why have we got this square foot in this retail store? What value is it bringing? And I think that's kind of one of the points, right, that you're now working towards.
Well, absolutely, because we talked about satisfaction from the shopper perspective. We touched on the satisfaction, from the sales colleagues perspective. So we're in early stages at the moment with a retailer that's just opened a very successful marketplace offering on their website. And one of the things that they hadn't anticipated was the fact that actually the sales colleagues were getting really frustrated by customers endlessly coming into the store saying, oh, I saw this on the website. Do you have, and needing to go and say 9 times out of 10, sorry, we don't do that. It's only on the website. You go and try it there. So there's, there's the shopper satisfaction side, there's the colleague satisfaction side, and then of course there are the retail economics. And at the end of the day, that is what drives the whole story.
For sure.
And the economics are always pretty positive. I mean, CloudShelf type solutions, well, I don't know all of the others, but I know typically generate 5 to 7 times ROI for the complete cost of ownership of the solution. So when you go and take the margin, the additional margin that the retailer is generating, I'm not talking about sales, I'm talking about additional margin.
Right.
That will go and cover the cost of implementing this kind of solution 5 to 7 times in most cases. So there is a real benefit there. But in the case of the spoken hub type organization, the benefits are much, much greater still. Because all of a sudden, the retailer is actually opening locations that have a rent value that may be only a fifth of what their typical locations are.
Right.
The stock cost is only a tenth. And so all of a sudden, you found something that is really transforming the retail economics, enabling them to go and do these kind of things that simply would have been impossible without digital.
So my question on that, so from that hub and spoke design that we talked about, is the hub typically like a superstore or is it literally just warehousing?
So in the case that I'm referring to right now, the hub is a superstore.
Mm.
But it could absolutely be a warehouse type environment.
Yeah, I mean, the only logic that I had there is that obviously the storage of warehousable stock is much more cost effective, than in a store, because you can just stack things as you want to. They don't need
Yep.
to look presentable. You can just use every inch of that square footage. So I could see that being another really good use case, is where technically you do just have 8 spokes and then one hub in the center, and they're all just utilizing the smallest footprint possible, probably making the most cost effective way of having a lot of stores and a lot of footprint, whilst all just
Mm.
being warehoused from the center, which is at maximum an hour and a half away from any one store at any given time.
You're spot on.
Interesting. So, I mean, that leads me on to my next question, is just around the kind of future of brick and mortar stores, because I think especially during the kind of COVID time, and I guess just with the long revelation of more online shopping every day in, day out, what do you now see the future of digital signage? Well, I guess the future of retail brick and mortar stores being, both from a digital signage perspective and just in general.
Yeah. Well, point one, I think I may have labored this one excessively already, but I mean, the future is that they're around. So
Hmm.
that's already a really important point. But their role is evolving.
Mm.
What they've always been really, really good at, or the best stores, is creating that kind you refer to all the brand equity, the brand experience. And so much of that experience tends to be expressed through the colleagues themselves and the way they interact with customer support and help.
Mm.
So I think that human part, and I know you want to talk about AI, but I think that human part of brick and mortar retail is even more important, because I can get the dematerialized experience
Mm.
anytime online. So when I am going to a store, probably in most cases, I'm in favor of that kind of interaction.
Yeah.
Sure, there'll be some people who, I go into the store, I don't want to talk to anybody, etc.
Hmm.
But most people actually welcome that when it's well done.
No.
So I think an emphasis on that. I think secondly, the second big change is going to be around the size of the ranges. So as online shoppers, we've all become very used to having very large ranges.
Mm.
And we're seeing, I think, sort of two other things really drive that. One I touched on a few minutes ago, it was around marketplace offerings. But Tesco has just launched a marketplace offering with Marketplacer on their website. And all of a sudden, you no longer have 8 barbecues that you can buy, but you have 850 barbecues that you can go and choose from.
Right.
So the change in range size is exponential.
Yeah.
And somehow all of these brick and mortar retailers or mixed retailers, omni-channel retailers, are going to have to find a way of bringing these very extended ranges into the stores to go and make sure they never disappoint at any point.
It's a
So,
logistical nightmare.
sorry?
From my perspective, that sounds like a logistical nightmare, just to keep all of that stock. I don't understand how it's done, but I do totally appreciate that. Back when I
Well,
was younger, you'd go and see like a range of 3 things, and it'd be like, here are the 3 things we have. We have that. This is our summer's
yeah.
range, and then that would be it. And now the plethora of choice that's available is so gigantic that it's difficult to even, to be honest with you, as a purchaser, it's difficult to even know exactly what it is that you want to buy.
Well, that's where I think AI is going to come in.
Okay,
So that's
interesting.
the AI bit. We'll touch on that in a few minutes. But
Yeah.
as a retailer, I've got to find a way of getting these things in the store, but without, of course, having the stock. The whole of the
Mm.
marketplace model is based on the fact that actually the retailer is not holding the stock. So
Yeah.
that's one of the other big transformations that's happening.
Mm.
And that's a massive opportunity for all forms of promotional signage on display screens, and then, of course, all the interactive type experiences CloudShelf would be offering.
Yeah.
Then alongside the marketplace thing, I think there's also a big trend towards circularity. So consumers want to be able to go and buy things that have been pre-loved, pre-owned,
Sure.
etc. When you think about it, it's quite obvious that if you're looking at a particular pre-loved pullover or a pram or whatever, then there's no way that every single one of the outlets can go and have that
No.
particular
Yeah, of
pre-loved pram.
course.
And therefore, again, these digital type solutions are going to be really important in enabling that. So I think that's what's going to happen on the range side. And then, as I've also sort of pointed out, I think that on the actual layout of stores.
Mm.
I don't know anybody who, I know there was a lot of hype around retail parks. I don't know. I've never actually met somebody who enjoys going to a retail park, getting in their car and driving out or through traffic jams, and then it, it, whereas high streets that have been so maligned for quite some time, I actually have great faith that this convergence of digital and these retailers all wanting closer points of presence to customers could actually be part of what drives a high street revival.
Interesting. No, that is, I mean, I've seen kind of movements in this way. Some like high streets that have been quiet for a long time are starting to get a little bit of a revival. Maybe it's almost like people just fighting back a little bit against just everything being totally digital. I think actually what helped that a lot was the lifting of COVID, where people were just suddenly so sick of being inside all the time. They're like, it's
Yeah.
time to leave the house to do something or anything, but it's got to be an experience, kind of as to what we talked about before.
And you're spot on. And indeed, in the month following COVID, it was the local high streets and independent stores that were the fastest growing segment in retail.
For
So
sure.
but that may have been a bit of a, as you're saying, a bit of a counteraction to what we'd all just been
For
through.
sure. Yeah, just balancing itself back out again as to where it was. So, I mean, and that does lead me to the final question I want to talk to you about, which is AI. But before we do that, I just wanted to make a quick note that if there is anybody watching at the moment and you've got any questions for Giles, drop them in the comment now. We've got Joe on. So if there's anything in particular you want to ask about CloudShelf or retail, or if you're looking at digital signage for the first time, this is a live video, but it will be canned and sent out later on. So if you do want to sign up to Digital Signage Explored on LinkedIn, it's also available on Spotify, on YouTube, and on signagelive.com as well. So you can always go back and listen to it again, and you'll see snippets of this turn up in our social media feed as well. So if there are any questions, feel free to drop them in now. Otherwise, once we get to the end of this question, we'll wrap up. But Giles, I think this is I just like to have one question that's quite consistent to everybody, because I think it's really fascinating to then start getting a holistic overview of everybody's perspective in different verticals and industries, but all with quite a lot of thought leadership. And AI is obviously that big piece now that we want to talk about. So you kind of just touched on it earlier, and it was really interesting where you're about to go with that. But where do you think AI is going to fit into this whole kind of retail
Hmm.
experience going forward?
Well, I think that in the very near term, and in a not particularly disruptive way, it's going to be around the merchandising and better presenting and organizing the products around what I'm interested in,
Mm,
the associations of products. So if I'm looking at a pair of jeans, what goes particularly well with it, etc. And none of that sounds particularly revolutionary, because in some cases you already see it done very well. But you see it done very well by very well established retailers that have vast teams of people
mm,
who are actually manually tagging all of the products and the associations. Well, AI is making that available now to just about every retailer.
right.
I think what you're going to see is a kind of democratization of high quality merchandising, with AI doing a lot of the legwork.
Mm-hmm.
But all the same, even though I think that's going to really, really change the game for many retailers, I'm going to put that in the non-disruptive category of what I think AI is about to do.
Right.
Where I see AI being completely disruptive is in the online only world.
Hmm.
All of a sudden, when I have my own AI bot, I have now my chat GPT has memory. It remembers everything that we've talked about because I've given it permission to do. It knows quite a lot about my family, about my requirements, etc., etc. You can see how very, very quickly
Mm,
it's going to become my companion for finding the best pair of shoes for this style. I take a photo of it. What should I wear on it on my feet? And all of a sudden, it has my best interests at heart.
mm,
That's a complete transformation, compared to, say, the Amazon model, where I can also ask it for a pair of shoes to go out to a party, but I have no means of knowing whether actually the algorithm there is doing what's best for me, or much more likely is doing what's best for Amazon.
that's
So all of a sudden, we're all going to be massively empowered with these personal shopper bots that will go and help us find exactly what we need.
mm,
And that means that, the what in the early 2000s, late 1990s, started off as being portals to go and access all these products, and then evolved into, for instance, Amazon, it's going to be much, much harder for them to actually compete in terms of a front end promoting to me, which means that all of their competition is going to be much more focused on the thing that they do already incredibly well, related to the logistics, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, a long way of saying that I think that that is going to be the real disruption in retail and retail behaviors and relationship between shoppers and certain retail outlets.
Yeah. But it's interesting because that is actually, to be honest with you, not the answer I thought you were going to give at all. And that's really interesting because most of the AI conversations we've had so far have been very focused on the business freedom, businesses being able to have more ability, being able to make decisions faster, being able to A/B test faster. So it is interesting to see and think about that from what am I as a user going to have, and maybe there'll be some AI, some compilation of different AI parts that comes out later that goes, almost like APIs. You'll have our AI, our personal AI that goes and reaches out to, let's say, I don't know, a retailer of some sort and goes, and they have a conversation on our behalf. Hey, I've got, Tim. Yeah, I know Tim. He likes kind of darker clothes, and he likes this. He's kind of tighter fitting clothes. He doesn't like anything too baggy. And then this AI kind of comes back and go, "What about this?" And they're almost having their own exchange there. And there's going to be a very, very interesting point where suddenly we're not making our own decisions. It's just these two kind of assimilations of our own information going at it to have that conversation to go. This is
hopefully we'll still make the decision as to
we'll make the final call for sure. But
no. I mean, maybe at the end we even go and delegate that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's an argument that might happen, and I think what we'll find more and more from that is that maybe we will still have influence over our own final decision, but we won't necessarily be aware of what we don't get to see. Very much in the world that we have online now, whereas my Facebook feed versus your Facebook feed is going to be completely different, and there's absolutely not much I can do about that. I can only try and push the algorithm to do what I want it to do, and I have to be very conscious of that. Where with AI, it's almost going to be this kind of, it's going to be two huge amounts of data sets touching each other, making a decision on something that's best for us in a way.
But I think this is more of a general point on AI. I think the future of AI is in unblack boxing. So indeed, the thing that worries us right now is that we have no idea how ChatGPT reached a conclusion, and we're not completely sure whether it's hallucinating or actually based on facts. And I think that a lot of the work that is fascinating right now is working on these new kinds of AI models, even newer kind of AI models that have the means to explain how they reach the decision. So, next time you go and end up with a slightly baggier clothes, you'll be able to ask it, why did you recommend those?
Well, I appreciate that because I mean,
come back because you put a few kilos on too many.
No, I know. Well, I appreciate that. I mean, it's funny because dealing here with marketing, we deal with the requests that come through inbound, and when people are asking questions or looking about more product information, and the volume of individuals, we always ask the question, how did you hear about us? Because it's useful for us to kind of gauge this. There's so many different touch points that we could potentially be, and sometimes it's just easier to ask a question. We have seen a huge influx in ChatGPT being the response. We heard about you through ChatGPT, where you go, how can we affect that? There's no way of affecting that. It is just put out good information. I think some of the things we do here on video is beneficial for that, but it is very much removed from understanding the decision tree as much as you would have typically been like in the past. Where did you hear from us? I saw this newspaper article. I saw this billboard. Very, very cut and dry. And now it's almost like I heard it from the system and I don't know what it's thinking. It just told me that we should speak to you. So it's just interesting to see that kind of evolution of decision making on our behalf.
Yeah, I agree. Having said that, you touched on something just before. I was saying this for me is the disruptive part in retail, but I have no doubt, and it's where I started by saying that actually in all of the back-end optimization, the smarter merchandising, etc., that's where we're going to go and see more and more implementations, more things happening faster, greater democratization, greater access to these kind of services for all types of retailers. I think that one of the things maybe a logical conclusion of that is whereas so much of the online world has moved towards a winner-takes-all type model, I do believe that in this environment, there is actually, once again, great hope for a lot of these independent, smaller retailers to take advantage of the fact that for the first time, they can access the kind of tools that previously were only available to a Tesco or a Next or an IKEA.
That's funny you say that, actually, because Matt Steedman from Amp Digital came on the show talking about QSR, said something very similar, just about how he thinks that the presence of AI and some of the new technologies out there are going to give those small QSRs far more power than it's going to give the big kind of multinationals, because they can do tenfold what they could do before, whereas multinationals, just to build the infrastructure to kind of give the sign off that they can use it, and there's so much more brand control in there. Whereas if I'm dealing with 3 or 4 coffee shops, I'm going to use AI to make all of my marketing content, because I'm probably, low on staff, high on cost, and just trying to get the most out of it. So it's interesting that you say the same thing about retail, where there's this opportunity for big growth for smaller companies.
Small is beautiful.
Interesting. Well, Giles, I really appreciate you jumping on the call here. It's been really good to have you on, and just listening to your insights is always very interesting. Where can people find you?
They can find me at Giles at cloudshelf.ai is the easiest, or on LinkedIn, or they can go onto our website, cloudshelf.ai, and somehow the messages will magically get through to me.
Yeah, the power of AI. Perfect. Thank you, Giles. Well, thanks very much for joining for this episode of Digital Signage Explored. Again, we're trying to build a community of individuals here, whether it be thought leaderships or people who have used digital signage in the past. If you have used digital signage and you'd like to come and tell your story, do come and reach out to me on LinkedIn. More than happy to have you on the show and talk about it. And we just celebrated our 1-year anniversary yesterday, I think it was. So we've made it across the finish line. Thanks, Joe. I can see everyone clapping in the background. But we will be back again in 2 weeks' time with our next show, which is actually going to be a deep dive into commercial structure of digital signage. It's one that I've been working on and documenting for a while, which I think is going to be really, really, really important. Giles, thank you so much again, and thank you everybody for joining.
Well, Tim, my pleasure, and how great to have been on the inaugural live show.
Absolutely. Thanks, Giles. I'll speak to you soon.
Brilliant. Cheers.
Bye.
Take care.